Mikal Bridges is heading to the Knicks in a huge trade that gives Brooklyn 4 unprotected first round picks as well as another protected one, and a second rounder as well, and a pick swap actually. This is the first time the Knicks and the Nets have made a trade with each other since 1983. The Nets also gave Bojan Bogdanovic just to match the salary with Mikal Bridges. It's a solid trade for both teams because it just furthers the Knicks' position as contenders in the East, as well as actually allowing the Nets to fully start rebuilding. It's definitely a safer trade for the Nets than it is for the Knicks just because of the 4 unprotected first round picks that they send with it. These picks are in 2025, 27, 29 and 2031. A huge factor is definitely how good the Knicks are going to be in 5 or 7 years' time. Their team is still relatively young, but assuming they retain all their main players, guys like OG, Randall, Brunson and Bridges would all be in their mid-30s by the time those picks actually come around. Or maybe I should say early 30s, but regardless, it's still a big question of whether those guys will actually still be on the team at that point just because of how many salaries they're going to have to pay. OG Anunoby just signed a 5-year deal for $212 million, and at the moment Julius Randle's on $29 million a year, Brunson's on $26 million a year, and Bridges is on just over $22 million a year. All 3 of those guys, their contracts will end by 2026, and that's with a player option for some of them in the 25-26 season. So by the time the 2026 free agency comes around, whether they can actually retain 2 or 3 of those guys, I'm not sure if it's even possible with the salary cap. You never necessarily know how the team's going to look at that point, but if this Mikal Bridges trade doesn't end with some sort of playoff success for the Knicks, then in 7 years' time they don't have their first round pick. So it could just come back to bite them. It's a similar sort of thing that the Nets did in the Boston trade back in, 2012, whatever it was, when they traded Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett for a bunch of first round picks. And those first round picks ended up being Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And it's just seen as an all-time horrible trade for the Nets, and it's a similar sort of thing as this when you're just giving up a bunch of first-rounders that are unprotected. The Knicks are doing it because they're in a win-now situation, but they still have to compete with Boston in the East. The trade obviously gives the Knicks a much better team, but 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges, who's at best probably a second or third option on the offense, it seems like a lot. It's like the same sort of package that Kevin Durant was traded for. It's not as much as what Kevin Durant was traded for, but with the status of those picks, you never know what it would end up being. I'm no expert on salary cap, but my main concern is just regarding how they're going to retain their players once the contracts are up. With the current contracts that particularly Brunson and Bridges are on, I'm assuming they're going to get paid a lot more once their new contracts come around. Obviously for Brooklyn, they're not in a win-now situation, so they don't really lose a whole lot by giving up Mikal. And they're also just traded back for their own 2025 pick. They kind of intend on tanking the season anyway. At the end of the day, only time will tell how this trade will turn out in a few years' time. You never know, maybe the Knicks win a championship. Mikal Bridges is their star player. You never really know what happens, but it just seems like a lot to give up for a guy like Mikal Bridges, who is good, but it's a lot of draft capital for him. For the Knicks, it's probably just a question of whether they can get past Boston in the East, if they're good enough to do that, which they could be. And then their team is still young, so they've got a few years left in them at least. And then the Nets, it doesn't seem like they really lose much by trading Bridges for 5 first-round picks. So as a Nets fan, you can't be too mad. They're just going full rebuild, getting draft capital. But regardless, the Knicks will be a fun team to watch with the current lineup they've got going.